Gas masks, from Jan Struther's Mrs. Miniver. Clem had to go and get his gas mask early, on his way to the office, but the rest of them went at 1:30, hoping that the lunch hour would be less crowded. It may have been, but even so there was a longish queue. They were quite a large party, Mrs. Miniver and Nanny, Judy and Toby, Mrs. Adie, the Scotch cook, lean as a winter aspen, and Gladys, the new house-parlour maid, a pretty girl with complicated hair. 6 of them, or 7 if you counted Toby's teddy-bear, which seldom left his side, and certainly not if there were any treats about. For to children, even more than to grown-ups, and this is at once a consolation and a danger, any excitement really counts as a treat, even if it is a painful excitement like breaking your arm, or a horrible excitement like seeing a car crash, or a terrifying excitement like playing hide-and-seek in the shrubbery at dusk. Mrs. Miniver herself had been nearly grown up in August 1914, but she remembered vividly how her younger sister had exclaimed with shining eyes, "I say, I'm in a war!" But she clung to the belief that this time, at any rate, children of Vin's and Judy's age had been told beforehand what it was all about, had heard both sides, and had discussed it themselves with a touching and astonishing maturity. If the worst came to the worst, it was funny how one still shied away from saying, "if there's a war," and fell back on euphemisms. If the worst came to the worst, these children would at least know that they were fighting against an idea, and not against a nation. Whereas the last generation had been told to run and play in the garden, had been shut out of the grown-ups' worried conclaves, and then quite suddenly had all been plunged into an orgy of licensed lunacy, of boycotting Grimm and Struwelpeter, of looking askance at their cousin's old Fraulein, and of feeling toward ducks and puppies the uneasy tenderness of a devout charwoman dandling her daughter's love-child. But this time those lunacies, or rather the outlook which bred them, must not be allowed to come into being. To guard against that was the most important of all the forms of war work which she and other women would have to do. There are no tangible gas masks to defend us in wartime against its slow, yellow, drifting corruption of the mind. The queue wormed itself on a little. They moved out of the bright, noisy street into the sunless corridor of the town hall. But at least there were benches to sit on. Judy produced pencil and paper, she was a far-sighted child, and began to play consequences with Toby. By the time they edged up to the end of the corridor, Mr. Chamberlain had met Shirley Temple on his tube lift, and Herr Hitler was closeted with Minnie Mouse in an even smaller rendezvous. When they got into the town hall itself, they stopped playing. Less than half an hour later they came out again in the sunlit street. But Mrs. Miniver felt afterward that during that half-hour she had said good-bye to something. To the last shreds which lingered on her, perhaps, of the old, false, traditional conception of glory. She carried away with her, as well as a litter of black rubber pigs, a series of detached impressions, like shots in a quick-cut film. Her own right hand with the pen in it, filling up 6 yellow cards in pleasurable block capitals. Mrs. Adie sitting up as straight as a ramrod under the fitter's hands, betraying no signs of the apprehension which Mrs. Miniver knew she must be feeling about her false fringe. Gladys's rueful giggle as her elaborate coiffure came out partially wrecked from the ordeal. The look of sudden realization in Judy's eyes just before her face was covered up. The back of Toby's neck, the valley deeper than usual because his muscles were taut with distaste. He had a horror of rubber in any form. A very small child bursting into a wail of dismay on catching sight of its mother disguised in a black snout. The mother's muffled reassurance. "It's only Mum, Duck. Look, it's just a mask, like at Guy Fawkes, see?" Me mater mala sus est. Absurdly remembered the Latin catch Vin had told her, which can mean either "my mother is a bad pig" or "run, mother, the pig is eating the apples." Finally, in another room there were the masks themselves, stacked close, covering the floor like a growth of black fungus. They took what had been ordered for them, 4 medium-sized, 2 small, and filed out into the street. It was for this, thought Mrs. Miniver, as they walked toward the car, that one had boiled the milk for their bottles and washed their hands before lunch, and not let them eat with a spoon which had been dropped on the floor. Toby said suddenly, with a chuckle, "We ought to have got one for Teddy." It would have been almost more bearable if he had said it seriously. But just as they were getting into a car, a fat woman went past with a fatter husband. "You did look a fright," she said. "I had to laugh." One had to laugh.